Alrighty, guys, welcome back. Labyrinth: The War on Terror here on Steam, the digital adaptation of Labyrinth: The War on Terror from GMT Games. We are going to play offline and we're going to go through the US tutorial. So, we'll check out the US tutorial here, and if you're interested, we did the other tutorials in the first episode of this. Alright, so thank you for this information, giving back feedback, blah, blah, blah. Let's get things started here. Alright, each player starts the game with 9 cards in hand. Turns are broken down in the action phase, in which each player will play 2 cards. The jihadist player will play their cards first, then the US player will respond. Once both players have played all their cards from their hand, the turn will end when players will draw a new hand of cards for their next turn. The turn sequence shows that your opponent will be playing first in this action phase. He's playing recruit action, Jahib. Your opponent is chosen to play Jahib from their first card. It's a US event, but the card has a condition for playing it, shown in the gray text. Play if no country is under Islamic rule. Since Afghan is currently under Islamic rule, the event will not be played. Your opponent is chosen to use the ops from Hajib for a recruit operation. This will attempt to bring cells from the fronting track to the map. Hajib has an ops value of 3, so his recruit operations can make 3 attempts. Recruit can only be attempted in a country with a cell or a cadre marker, so Afghanistan is the only available target for these attempts. Jihadist operations use the governance of the country to determine the requirements for each attempt. Your opponent would like to roll less than or equal to this value on a die if the target country were a good, fair, or poor governance. However, in this case, Afghanistan is Islamic's rule, so each recruit attempt will automatically succeed. The cell is moved from the funding track into the target space and placed on its sleeper side. Three cells are moved from the funding track to Afghanistan, where they're placed on their sleeper side. Hajib is discarded. Note that if the event had been triggered, the card would have been permanently removed from the game. To view the cards in the discard pile, you click on the discard button in the lower left-hand corner next to the cards in your hand. Card markers advance to the Jihadist card 2 box. Your opponent will now play a second card before you get a chance to respond. And it's going to be Wahhabism Travel. The Wahhabism card is played for the travel operation. Since it is a Jihadist event, the event will not be resolved when the Jihadist plays it for ops. Wahhabism has an ops value of 3, throw up to 3 different cells may be chosen to participate in the travel operation. The travel operation will allow your opponent to move cells around the map. Currently, there are only cells in Afghanistan, which is under Islamic rule. A jihadist player wants to move cells into other countries so that operations and events can be used to affect the governance there. He's going to attempt to travel to Pakistan. Attempt to travel to the Philippines, and attempt to travel to Russia. Pakistan is adjacent to Afghanistan, so the first travel attempt is automatic. The cell is moved to Pakistan and is placed on his sleeper side. The Philippines is a non-Muslim country that does not yet have a posture, so it needs to be tested before the die roll for the travel attempt. When performing the initial test of a non-Muslim country, a die roll of 4 or less, the posture will be set to soft. On a result of 5 or greater, the posture will be set to hard. The die roll is a 2, so the Philippines now has a soft posture, and the world GWOT is immediately adjusted. Since there is now one hard and one soft non-Muslim country, the world GWOT marker shifts to even. Since the Philippines is not adjacent to Afghanistan, the sail traveling from Afghanistan must roll against the country's governance, rolling less than or equal to the governance rating to determine whether the attempt succeeded. The Philippines has fair governance, and so the sail traveling there must roll a 1 or 2 in order to arrive safely. The die roll of 1, and so the sail succeeds in the travel attempt. It is placed on the sleeper side in the country. Note that the jihadist dice set uses a crescent and star icon for the 1 value, which denotes success. Following the travel attempt from the sail traveling to Russia is resolved. Since Russia is untested, we must test to see as we did for the Philippines. The test die roll is a 5, so Russia is marked with a hard posture. The world GWOT marker shifts to 1 hard. Like the Philippines, Russia is not adjacent to Afghanistan, so the sail traveling there has to roll for success. The governance of Russia is also fair, so a 1 or 2 is required. The die roll, however, is a 6, so the sail is eliminated and sent back to the funding track. It is placed into the rightmost box with less than 5 cells, leaving 9 cells on the funding track. The travel operation is now complete, and Wahhabism is discarded because this event was not resolved. The card marker is advanced to the play sequence track on the U.S. Card 1 box. After the jihadist player plays 2 cards, the U.S. player is given a chance to respond with 2 card plays. The turn sequence shows that you are playing your first card of this action. When you play a card from your hand, you can use it for the event or you can use it for the operation points. You can only use the event if it is a U.S. or neutral event. You can only use jihad events for the operation points, and then you must allow the jihadist player to resolve the event. HEU is a jihadist event, but the card has a condition for playing the event shown in the gray text. Play if Russia or Central Asia has a cell and no CTR marker. Neither Russia nor Central Asia currently have a cell, so if you play this card now, the event will not be resolved. If you wait until later in the turn, the jihadist player might move a cell to one of these countries, and then you would have to allow this event to resolve in order to play it. So it's a good card to play now when the conditions aren't satisfied and get it out of your hand. There are 6 types of operations on which the U.S. player can use the operation points from a card. The wars of ideas, to deploy, to disrupt, to alert, realignment, and reserves. We'll take a look at each of them as we play through this turn. War of ideas is your primary means of affecting governance in countries. Let's play the HEU to learn how the War of Ideas operations play. To play a card from your hand, we draw it up and we click on the War of Ideas. The purpose is to improve alignment or governance. We're going to target a neutral or ally Muslim country. If regime change, must have at least 5 more troops than cells. Each U.S. operation can only target 1 country, and the target must have governance less than or equal to the operation's value of the card played for the operation. And the target must have governance less than or equal to the operation value of the card played. Interesting. War of Ideas can only target a Muslim country if its alignment is neutral or ally. So the less than or equal to the operation value of the card. Governance less than or equal to the operation value of the card. Okay. Gulf states is a good target for two ops war of ideas. You can shift it to good governance. It will count 3 resources towards your victory condition. Any country adjacent to a good ally will receive a bonus on future war of idea attempts. For a war of ideas attempt, a single die roll is made. A 5 or 6 result is a success, and the country will shift one towards one better governance. 4 result will add an aid marker to the country if there isn't one there already. And a result of 3 or less is a failure and will have no effect. The die roll is a 4. There's a +1 modifier for the current U.S. prestige and a -1 modifier because this is attempt would improve the governance of the country to good. The die roll modifiers cancel each other out, and so the final result is 4, 1 pip short of success. The War of Ideas operation is a failure, but not all is lost. Since the attempt failed by 1 pip, an aid marker is placed in the Gulf states. So long as the aid marker remains in the Gulf states, future War of Idea operations will have a +1 die roll modifier for the aid. HEU is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. The card marker now advances to the U.S. Card 2 box. Your first attempt at War of Ideas in the Gulf states failed, but you did add a aid marker there. Let's give War of Ideas a second go and take advantage of that bonus. You need at least 2 ops to make another War of Ideas attempt in the Gulf states because it is a fair governance. Ethiopia Strikes is a U.S. event, but the conditions for playing the event is not currently met and likely won't be met during this turn. Play if Somalia or Sudan is under Islamic rule. This makes it a good card to play for a War of Ideas operation at this point. Play Ethiopia Strikes for the War of Ideas. Select the Gulf states as a target and commit. The only difference in this attempt is that there will be a net modifier +1. Since there is already an aid marker in the country, missing the target by 1 will not add a second aid marker. A die is cast and the result is a 6, more than enough for success. The US dice set uses a 6 on the star icon that denotes a success. A good resources marker on the track is shifted to the 3 box since the Gulf states has a resource value of 3. Since success results in the governance shifting to good, the aid marker is removed and the governance improved token is placed on Gulf states. Gulf states is now a good ally country, so it will provide a +1 bonus to all future War of Idea rolls in adjacent Muslim countries. Note, War of Ideas cannot be performed in adjacent Iran. Ethiopia Strikes is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. The card marker is advanced on the play sequence track to the U.S. Resolves plot box. At this point, any unresolved plots on the map are resolved. Presently, there are no plots, so we can move the card marker back to the Jihadist Card 1 box on the play sequence track. And he is going to play an event, Abdul Saif. A new action phase begins and your opponent must again play 2 cards. Abdul Saif is played for its nasty event to put some pressure on you in Southeast Asia. Per the event text, a cell is placed in the Philippines from the funding track, leaving 8 cells on the funding track. Since the Philippines have already been tested, it won't be tested again. Abdul Saif is an event with lingering effects, so we will need to place an event marker. Note that such an event has the word mark on the card to remind players to place an event marker. Event markers are placed in the events in play boxes on the map. You can hover the mouse cursor over any event marker in the box to see the event card that places the marker. Finally, Abdu Saif has the remove text at the bottom of the card. If played as an event, it is removed from the game permanently. It can only be played as an event once during the game. It is placed in the remove from play pile. The card markers advance to the Jihadist card 2 box. And he is going to Sahira. For the second card, the Jihadist plays Sahira for a plot operation. A plot operation may target any country, including Iran, not under Islamic rule. At least one cell must be present in each target country for each roll made there, and each sleeper cell used shifts to active. The first use each turn of a card for plot operations ignores rather than triggers any U.S. associated event. This is one method you can use to bury a U.S. associated event. It would have been allowed to resolve the Shahara event under normal circumstances, but first plot prevents that in this case. Sahara provides 2 ops for the Jihadists, has selected both the cells in the Philippines. You might note that only 2 ops could be used to plot in the Philippines since there are only 2 cells in the country. If a 3 ops card had been played, the third attempt could be used in Pakistan or declined. Both of the cells used for this operation are flipped to active. The Philippines has fair governance, so a roll of 1 or 2 is needed in order to place a plot marker. Each successful plot die roll placed into the target country an available plot marker with a number equal to or less than the card value used as an each successful plot die roll places into the target country an available plot marker with a number equal to or less than the card value used or an available WMD. This marker is placed face down so the U.S. player cannot see the plot value. A failed plot roll has no further effects. The die result is a pair of 1s, a Jihadist success. Since the 2 ops card was played, only 1 plot and 2 plot markers may be selected. If there is a WMD plot in the available plots box, it could be used regardless of the ops value of the card played. Jihadist selects 2 available plot markers to have placed face down in the Philippines. You will have an opportunity to block these plots with your 2 card plays. If the plots are still in the country at the end of the action phase, they will be resolved with a sequence of effects that favor the Jihadist player. As per the Abdu Saif event, the U.S. loses 2 prestige points, 1 for each plot marker placed in the Philippines. The prestige marker moves from 7 to 5 on the U.S. prestige track. Sahara is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. The card marker advances to the U.S. Card 1 box. Abdu Saif will continue to be a problem for you. As the U.S. prestige drops, it will be increasingly difficult for you to succeed on your War of Ideas attempts. Fortunately, you have an answer in your hand. Moro Talks will counter the Abdu Saif event and remove it from play. Play the U.S. event. As per the event, the Jihadist player loses 1 funding, and so its marker is moved from 9 to 8 on the track. More importantly, the Abdu Saif event is blocked. The Abdu Saif event marker is removed, and the Moro Talks event marker is put into play. If Abdu Saif had not been played in this game, The Moro Talks event marker would prevent it from being played. The Moro Talks card has been removed from the game permanently. The card marker is advanced to the U.S. Card 2 box. There are still 2 plots in the Philippines that will resolve at the end of the action phase if you don't remove them first. An alert operation can deal with one of them, but that would still leave one unaccounted for. No matter what, one of these plots is going to go off during the upcoming resolve plots phase, and thus, no matter what, jihadist funding will go back up to 9 on the funding track. So let's choose to ignore the plot and instead find another way to put pressure on the jihadist player. Libyan Weapons of Mass Destruction is a 3-ops event, the U.S. event that is usually more valuable for the operation points than for the event for the U.S. player. Let's play it for the deploy operation. Deploy purpose is to move troops and target any Muslim country or the troop track. A regular deploy operation will move troops into an allied country or to the troop track. However, in this case, we want to use the regime change version of the deploy operation. Regime change can only be used when the U.S. posture is hard. It is the only U.S. operation that can be based in an Islamic rule country, and it can only target an Islamic rule country. Regime change can only be used when the U.S. posture is hard. It is the only U.S. operation that can be used in an Islamic rule country, and it can only target an Islamic rule country. A regime change operation also requires 3 ops to proceed, but you've already have that covered. The regime change operation will change the target country to be an ally and perform a test of the country's governance, setting it to either fair or poor. You can use this to break up your opponent's hold on Afghanistan. The regime change operation requires at least 6 troops to move from the same location to the target country. The only place you have 6 troops available is the troop track, so this will bring some of those troops on the board. Select troops from the troop track. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You don't want to use more than the required 6 troops to avoid shifting the troop marker to overstretch, which would cause you to draw fewer cards for the next turn. Afghan receives a regime change marker, and all the cells in the country are flipped to active. The regime change marker indicates that any recruit attempts in the country will automatically succeed. Afghanistan alignment changes to ally, and we must roll to determine a new governance. We get a bit lucky as the roll is a 5, so Afghanistan shifts to fair governance. The fair good countries marker is moved to the 4 box on the victory track, while the poor and Islamic country marker is moved back to the 3 box on the track. You must also make a prestige roll as a result of the regime change. First, a single die is rolled to determine the direction of the change. In this case, a 6 means the prestige will increase. Then you're going to roll 2 more dice, and the lesser of the 2 is the amount of the prestige change. The dice come up with 1 and a 4, so the final result of the prestige roll is a gain of +1 prestige, bringing the U.S. prestige back up to 6. Regime change is a powerful operation, but it does have some risks. Jihadist recruit operations in a regime change country are automatically successful. The U.S. must make a prestige roll after conducting a regime change, which has a high probability of causing U.S. prestige to go down. Additionally, the U.S. cannot deploy out of a regime change country unless it has a surplus of 5 troops over the number of cells in the country. The U.S. cannot wage wars of ideas in a regime change country unless it has a surplus of 5 troops over the number of cells in the country. Shifting the country to good will remove the regime change marker, but you'll need to clear some cells from the country before you can attempt to improve the governance. The regime change marker will also be removed if the jihadist manages to restore Islamic rule to the country. The Libyan WMD is placed in the discard pile since the event is not resolved. The card marker now advances to resolve plots. There are 2 plots to resolve in the Philippines. Both plots are revealed by the jihadist player and then resolved one at a time. Both plots are 2 markers. The first one is revealed and resolved. Since the plot is a non-Muslim country other than the United States, we'll use that portion of the plot resolution sequence. First, the plot's numerical value is added to the jihadist funding. In this case, the jihadist funding would go up by 2. Since the jihadist funding marker cannot be set higher than 9 on the funding track, the excess funding is ignored. Next, a posture must be rolled for the Philippines. This is handled by a die roll in the same manner as if the Philippines were being tested for the first time. The die roll is a 2 and the Philippines remain soft. The plot marker is placed back into the available plot box on the map. Now the second plot is resolved in the same manner. There is no adjustment to the jihadist funding since it is presently topped off at 9. Another posture roll is made for the second plot. This time a 6 is rolled, and the Philippines posture changes to hard. Now that there are 3 hard countries and no soft countries, so the World GWOT marker is moved to the 3 hard space on the U.S. World GWOT relation track. The plot backfired on the jihadists. Since there are no more plots to resolve, a new action phase is started and the card marker is moved back to the jihadist card 1 box on the play track. Now the jihadist is in the hot seat. They have 4 active cells in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is under fair governance, which makes the active cells there quite vulnerable to U.S. disrupt operations. Your opponent plays Axis of Evil for Jihad Operation. In many ways, the Jihad Operation is the counterpart to the U.S. War of Ideas Operation. It is the jihadist player's primary tool for degrading a country's governance. Axis of Evil is a 3-ops event, so up to 3 cells may be selected for jihad attempts. 2 cells in Afghanistan and the single cell in Pakistan are selected to participate in the minor jihad. The cells in Afghanistan are already active, but the cell in Pakistan will be flipped over to its active side. Since each successful minor jihad roll worsens governance in the target country by 1 level towards poor, so good goes to fair and fair goes to poor, and removes 1 aid marker. Note that unless conditions for a major jihad are met, a jihad operation cannot shift a country to Islamic rule. Each failed jihad roll removes a cell to the funding track. The first attempt in Afghanistan governance is a 6. That is a failure. The cell conducting this operation is eliminated and sent back to the funding track. There are now 9 cells on the funding track. A second attempt in Afghanistan is a 2. That is a success. A success in a minor jihad degrades the governance of the country 1 level, but not to Islamic rule. Afghans' governance is degraded to poor. Note that a minor jihad success does not alter alignment, only governance. The fair and good countries and poor Islamic countries markers are updated on the victory track markers. Next, the cell in Pakistan conducts a minor jihad attempt and rolls a 1, another success. Pakistan's governance is shifted down to poor, and the sleeper cell that conducted the operation there goes active. The poor Islamic counter marker moves from 4 to 5 on the box, and the fair and good countries marker moves down from the 3 to the 2 box on the victory track. Axis of Evil is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. The card marker is advanced on the play sequence track to the Jihadist card 2 box. And he's going to play an event. For the second play on this action phase, your opponent plays the Opium event in order to lock down the U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Per the text event, 3 cells are placed in the sleeper side in Afghanistan from the funding track. Afghanistan is not under Islamic rule, so the second part of the event text is no effect. If it was still under Islamic rule, the remaining 6 cells on the funding track would be placed in Afghanistan. Opium is placed in the discard pile once it doesn't. Opium is placed in the discard pile since it doesn't have the remove indicator on the card. The card is now advanced to the U.S. card 1 box. You want to end the regime change in Afghanistan as quickly as possible to free up the troops there. Using War of Ideas to improve the governance to good is the best means to accomplish that. But War of Ideas isn't an option in a regime change country unless there are at least 5 more troops and cells in that country. Saddam is a 3-ops jihadist event. The requirements on the event are currently met, so it will trigger if you play it. The event would raise the funding track, but since funding is already at 9, it can't go any higher, so you will have no effect if you play it now. Disrupt Operation will clear out some of the cells in Afghanistan, but first, you should allow your opponent to resolve the Saddam events. Now you can use Saddam for 3-ops Disrupt Operation. A disrupt operation requires a target country that has at least 1 cell or cadre in it and is an ally, or has at least 2 troops in it, or is non-Muslim, but it cannot be Iran. Afghanistan is an ally and has troops, so it is a possible target for disruption. A disrupt operation in a country with at least 2 troops or whose posture is hard affects up to 2 cells. Otherwise, it only affects 1 cell. Disrupt of an active cell removes it to the funding track. Disrupt of a sleeper cell shifts it to active. Alternately, if there are no cells present, disrupt removes a cadre. So a disrupt operation country with at least 2 troops or whose posture is hard affects up to 2 cells. Otherwise, it only affects 1 cell. Disruption of an active cell removes it to the funding track. All right. So we want to and commit. The regime change operation in the last action phase flipped all of the cells present in Afghanistan at that time to active, so this disrupt operation can remove 2 of them. U.S. prestige is also increased by 1 for a disrupt operation in a country with troops. The U.S. prestige marker is moved from the 6 to the 7 box, putting the U.S. in the high prestige bracket once again. Saddam is placed in the discard pile. The event is considered to have been resolved even though it had no effect, but the card does not have the remove indicator. The card sequence is moved to the U.S. card 2 box. If the jihadists are able to shift Pakistan to Islamist rule, he would gain access to the Pakistani WMD arsenal. Those 3 plots would make plot operations much more dangerous. You want to prevent that if at all possible. The Irene card is another neutral card that has a different effect depending on which player uses it. It will allow the U.S. player to remove a cell from a Shiite mixed Muslim country. Since Pakistan is a Shiite mixed Muslim country, the event will be used there. The event text says to test the country, but Pakistan already has a governance, so it will not be tested again. There is only one cell in the country, so select that cell to be removed. The cell in Pakistan is eliminated and sent to the funding track. Now there are 9 cells on the track. Since the last cell was removed by an event, a cadre marker is placed in the country. The cadre marker is placed whenever the last cell in the country is removed by a disrupt operation or by an event. The cadre marker will allow the jihadists to use a recruit operation in this country. The Iran card does not have the remove indicator, so is placed in the discard pile. There are no plots to resolve, so we will go right back to the Jihadist card 1 box. Your opponent has 3 cards left in hand. They will play 2 of them in this action phase. In the next action phase, they will only be able to play the remaining card. Sahib ut Tahir is played for the one-ops travel operation. The lone active cell in Afghanistan will attempt to travel to Somalia. Somalia is a besieged regime marker, which makes it an easier target for a major jihad. Since Somalia is presently unmarked, it needs to be tested before the travel attempt can proceed. When a Muslim country is tested, a roll of 4 or less will set the governance to poor. A roll of 5 or higher will result in fair governance. The initial alignment for the country will always be neutral. Die roll of 3. Somalia is marked with the poor governance marker and its alignment is set to neutral. The poor Islamic country marker is moved from 5 to 6 on the victory track. Next, since Somalia was not adjacent to Afghanistan, the country from which the cell is traveling, a die must be rolled against the destination country's governance. The die roll is a 2, so the cell arrives safely in Somalia and is placed on its sleeper side. Sahib ut Tahir is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. The card mark is moved to the Jihadist card 2 box. Alright, the Jihadist now plays Masad and Shin Bet for a recruit operation. The conditions for the event are not met. There are no cells in Israel, Jordan, or Lebanon, so it can be played now without triggering the U.S. event. Both recruit attempts will be made in Somalia. Somalia is a great target for a major jihad since it is already marked with a besieged regime marker, but they'll need to have 5 cells in the country before a major jihad can be attempted. Both recruit rolls are successful, a 2 and a 3. Again, the jihadist rolls well. 2 cells are moved from the funding track to Somalia and placed in the sleeper side. Mose and Shinbet is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. The card marker is advanced to the U.S. card 1 box and the play sequence track. You'll want to deal with Somalia eventually, but for now you must stay the course and try to free your troops up in Afghanistan. You still aren't able to use War of Ideas there because you need 5 or more troops and cells in a regime country change. The cells in the country are all sleepers, so a single disrupt operation will only flip 2 of them to active. You could remove 2 of them with a pair of disrupt operations, but you'll need a 3-ops card for each disrupt operation in a poor country, and you only have 1 3-ops card left in your hand. Shais al-Mahdi is a neutral event that has a different effect based on which player plays it. For the US, it allows you to remove 2 cells in any Shiite mixed country that has both cells and troops. Since Afghanistan meets the requirement for Jahid al-Mahdi, we will play it. Select 2 active. Select 2 active. If Jahid al-Mahdi card does not have the remove indicator, so it's placed in the discard pile. Card is marker is moved to the U.S. card 2 box. Now there are 6 troops and only 1 cell in Afghanistan, so you can use your War of Ideas operation there. A surplus of 5 troops over cells is required for Wars of Ideas in the regime change country. Pakistan offensive is a 3 U.S. ops event. The event is only affected if the jihadists has played the Fatah event. Since we are unlikely to see the card during the remainder of the turn, it can be played for ops here. Since Afghanistan is the target of a War of Ideas operation, select Afghanistan, okay? Alright, I'm clicking. Die roll is a 4, which is just enough with the +1 DRM to produce the final target die roll of 5. The governance of Afghanistan shifts to fair. The fair good country marker is moved from the 2 to 3 box, and the poor and Islamic country markers moved down to the 5 box. Pakistani offensive is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. There are no plots to be resolved, so the card markers move back to Jihadist card 1 box on the play sequence track. Jihadist player must play the only card left in their hand. Leak is played for the 3 ops recruit operation. You are in position to shift Afghanistan to good with the next War of Ideas attempt there. That would lift the regime change, and the troops would be available to deploy elsewhere in the world. The jihadists can delay this by adding 1 cell, which would be enough to prevent a War of Ideas attempt until you can reduce the number of cells in the country. Recruiting in a regime change country is also an auto recruit, so there will be no die roll for this check. Jihadist player can split operations across several countries, so the remaining 2 recruit attempts will be in Somalia. However, there will be a die roll for each attempt there. Automatic success in Afghanistan. The recruit operation in Afghanistan is automatically successful since the country is still marked with a regime change. One cell is moved from the funding track to Afghanistan and is placed on his sleeper side. Somalia rolls a 3. Let me guess they roll another 3. Oh, how did I know? It's almost like I've played this before. The die roll for Somalia are a pair of 3s. 2 cells are moved from the funding track to Somalia, where they're placed on the sleeper side. 6 cells remain on the funding track. Leak is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. Jihadist is now on a card, so he does not get a second play in the action phase. The card marker is moved forward on the U.S. Card 1 box on the play sequence track. The U.S. players has several additional options on what to do when down to only one card left in his hand. You may play your last card for the event or operations. You may hold the last card until your next action phase. This will skip the rest of the current action phase. If the jihadist has card remaining, this will allow you to take another action phase after your opponent's next turn. If the jihadist's hand is empty, then you will keep this card in your hand for the next turn. You may discard the last card. This will skip the rest of the current action phase, but it will allow you to avoid the event if it's a jihadist card. In this case, the last card is a jihadist event that would both affect funding and prestige in your opponent's favor, so the decision here is to discard the last card in hand without triggering the event. To discard Gaza War, drag it from your hand and drop it to the discard last card banner down to the bottom. Since both players are on the cards and there are no plots to resolve, the turn comes to an end. We follow the end of the turn sequence before moving on to the start of the next turn. First, the jihadist funding marker is moved back 1 box. On the track, it goes down to 8. Next, the U.S. loses 1 prestige if there is any country under Islamic rule. There are no Islamic rule countries at present, so this step has no effect, but do note that the effect could be considerable. It's easy for new players to ignore the low resource value countries like Somalia, but consider the end of turn effect of having Somalia under Islamic rule, -1 prestige every turn. This can be devastating if the U.S. doesn't do something about it. Next, the U.S. gains 1 prestige if the world GWOT posture is the same as the U.S. and in the 3 box on the U.S. GWOT relations track on the map. So we gain a prestige if we have the same posture and we're in the 3 box on the relations track on the map. Since this is the case right now, the U.S. gains 1 prestige, moving the U.S. prestige marker to 8 box. The U.S. is 1 box closer to the very powerful, high prestige War of Ideas die roll modifier. Now we would place any cards in the lapsing events and first plot box from the map onto the discard pile. We didn't see any of these this turn, but we did see 1 card played into the first plot box. Sahira was moved from the first plot box to the discard pile. Next, we reset the reserve markers to 0. We didn't use these turns, so this step has no effect. Reserves can be used to augment the ops value of a card. A player can, for example, play a 1 ops card and place that ops in reserves, effectively saving the ops point for later. Then in a future card turn, the player can play another ops card and add the save reserves value to that card to a maximum of 3 ops in order to conduct an operation. Now we draw a new hand. The U.S. troops marker is in the war box on the troops track, so the U.S. will draw 8 cards. The jihadist funding marker is on the ample bracket on the funding track, so the jihadists will draw 9 cards. Note that the position of the troops marker determines the number of cards to be drawn. It does not determine the hand size. If, for example, the U.S. held its last card, it would still draw 8 cards at this time. Thus, if the U.S. held a card and the troops marker was on the low intensity box on the troops track, they would start the following turn with 10 cards in hand. Finally, the green regime change marker in Afghanistan is flipped to its tan side. The jihadist resources marker is now moved from 1 to 0 on the victory track, since there are no longer any countries under Islamic rule, and all regime change markers are on their tan side. That concludes one entire turn worth of play. The card mark is back on the jihadist card 1 for the play sequence track, ready for the next turn. We've now completed the entire turn in this tutorial. There are several operations which we have not yet been able to demonstrate, so we will continue to play through one more action phase. Oh good, one more action phase. Your opponent plays the GTMO event for a 3-ops jihad operation. Because there are 5 more cells and troops in Somalia, a major jihad operation is now possible in that country. Normally, a major jihad requires 2 successes in order to shift the country to Islamic rule. But Somalia is currently a besieged regime, so only 1 successful jihad roll is needed in this operation. All cells in the country go active even if they aren't selected to participate in this operation. The dice will be rolled against the governance of the target country. Somalia has poor governance, so 1 to 3 will be a success, 4 to 6 will be a failure. Three dice are cast and the results are 4, 6, and 2. Ordinarily, in order for a major jihad to shift poor to Islamic rule, and remember that major jihad is the only way to shift governance to Islamic rule, 2 successes must be thrown in a single operation. As with minor jihad, a cell is sent back to the funding track for each failed die roll. In this case, 3 dice were thrown, but 2 were failures, the 4 and the 6, and each caused the cell to be moved back to the funding track. Only the 2 die roll is a success. Ordinarily, this would not have been a major jihad. Ordinarily, this would have been a major jihad failure, but since Somalia started the game with a besieged regime marker, this results meet the requirements to shift the governance to Islamic rule. Somalia now has Islamic rule governance and shifts its alignment to adversarial. The regime marker is removed, and the jihadist resources marker is updated from the 0 to the 1 box on the victory track. Finally, a successful major jihad will increase the jihad funding by the resource value of the country that has just been shifted to Islamic rule. In this case, the funding goes up from 8 to 9. Hey Richard, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. The GTMO is placed in the discard pile since the event was not resolved. The card markers advance to the jihadist card 2 box now. This concludes the tutorial of Labyrinth. Please continue with the other available tutorials or try offline games against the bot to further your skills. There's also a complete rule book available that goes into these concepts more in depth, and thank you. Alright, so that is that. So yeah, great tutorials. Got a decent component overview, and then these 2 are really good. I wouldn't say you need to read them or watch them both necessarily, but they're both really good. Turn the music down. It's a little loud for me. So yeah, we are going to actually play a game of Labyrinth, the War and Terror, but I don't want to put that in the same episode as the tutorials. So I will be back on probably in a little bit to actually start a game of Labyrinth, the War on Terror, and hopefully you can join us for that later tonight as we try to learn the game a little bit more in depth this way than trying to do it with the board or with the card and dice version. We've done okay so far, but I thought going through this, watching the AI do the operations, we would get a better understanding of how to play it. Once we learn Labyrinth pretty decently, then we're going to go back and try it out on the old board and dice version. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching the tutorials for Labyrinth, the War and Terror. Again, this is early access. It's only version 0.7.9.134. So still a lot of work to do on it and a lot of more stuff to come, but highly recommended so far. The tutorials have been really good. And hopefully when we get to actually, let's create a game. I just want to make sure so there is, okay, so here's the each plot success places 2 available plot markers. This is the base level. Each plot success places 2 available plot markers. Each recruit places 2 available cells, and the U.S. must play all of its card. And then each plot success places 2. Yeah, right. Okay, so this is. All right, so let's. We're gonna play 1 deck, choose sides. Bot info, okay. Okay, so this is pretty much like playing. The bot plays their hand from top to bottom like a stack of cards and makes no effort to strategically play cards in a certain order. As compensation for this, when a bot plays a card with your event on it, it will not trigger. Okay, so this is pretty much the same as the AI in the actual game then. Okay. Hang on a second. Okay, I just wanted to I wanted to see how it just plays out. We are not going to yeah, this is a tutorial video. I just wanted to make sure it does have like AI that we can play against, so when we actually do a game, we have a good idea. Okay, and even though that had our event on it, we don't get to play it because they were playing against the bot. Okay, that's cool. I just wanted to see how it did it. So that's cool. All right, so thanks everybody. Camera's a little bit out of focus. I think it's you, not. I think it's your focus, man. I think you're probably playing it at like 480k or something. You might need to adjust the quality of the video. Anyways, Andre, thanks for joining us. Richard, thanks for joining us. We ran through again tutorials up here. And if you get this game, really good tutorials. So I highly recommend you check them out. And next time we're actually going to play a game offline and get to see how it plays. So hopefully we'll get that started maybe later tonight if I get a chance. And hopefully you can join us for that and help us figure out which cards to play and what we're doing, as this is just a learning experience for us as we're trying to learn how to play Labyrinth, the War on Terra. So thanks everyone for joining us. Everyone have a good evening, and we'll hopefully see you next time with our first game of Labyrinth. Thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you next time.